Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Darakht-e Danish Library. Darakht-e Danish Library aims to empower and support Afghan women by providing them access to open educational resources. At a time where women's freedoms have been heavily restricted in respect to obtaining education, working freely, and a few days ago, even on how and when they speak. Today we will be further discussing how Darakht-e Danish is expanding and working to support Afghan women. To divulge into this further, I'm honored to invite Dr. Laren Oates, Executive Director of Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan.
Well, firstly, I just want to start by saying a big tashakkur to our host tonight, to the Afghan Kitchen. We're very lucky to have this gorgeous venue and a little bit of their delicious tea and snacks. So thank you for hosting us. And thank you to all of you for coming out today and for celebrating with us. I think we need to celebrate these days. Yeah, there's lots happening, but there's lots of good things happening as well. So I'll go to my first slide. So what I thought I'd do is I just want to tell you a little bit about the origin story, I guess, of the library. And it may differ from the origin story that you'll hear from my colleagues. At this point, you know, we're enough years old that there'll be like different versions of the story out there and people remembering and misremembering things differently. So this is just my version, so I'll give that qualification. But it really started, you know, we're celebrating the 10th anniversary, so technically the founding of the library is in 2014, but it does go back a little bit further. And it goes back to a time when we started doing teacher training in Afghanistan, which was around 2008. And what we were seeing was teachers' struggles to access learning materials that they could use both in their classroom with their students and for their own professional development. So at that time, the majority of teachers were not professionally trained teachers, but they were working teachers. So they hadn't had the benefit of having gone to teachers' college. They didn't have libraries in their community. They didn't have access to the Ministry of Education's resources easily. And yet they were responsible for teaching students. And so what we wanted to do was to close that gap, to provide them access with high quality materials on the topics that they wanted to learn more about and to teach about in their own language. That was the key thing. Of course, you could find an abundance of materials on the internet for free, but not in the languages of Afghanistan. And so we looked around and said, well, what resources could we work with? And we saw that there were all of these multilingual Afghans all over the world who were capable of translating materials. So that was one resource. And another was technology, to use technology to give people access to many, many materials at once, freely and easily. And the idea was that investing in these teachers' knowledge and their access to materials would have an impact on the students they were teaching, and that we'd see better learning outcomes in the classrooms. So that was the original hypothesis. But what actually happened was we noticed once we got the system up and running, was that all kinds of people were using it, not just teachers, but there were students and a variety of other people. So we went with that, and my colleague might say more about that later, but I'll just go to the next slide and show you a little bit of a timeline, some of the highlights. So things started in 2008 with that teacher training work. But the pathway, the straight line that you see to 2014 was not a straight line at all. So we knew the concept, we knew what we wanted, and we went to a tech company and said, design us this online multilingual library for teachers in Afghanistan. We said what we wanted, and they came up with the first iteration. And it was not what we wanted. It didn't work the way we wanted it to. Didn't look the way we wanted it to, and so we went back and said, make these changes, and it still wasn't quite right, and then there were multiple iterations. At one point, we moved the entire platform off of Drupal to another kind. I won't bore you with all the technical details, just to say that it was a very zigzaggy pathway to actually just build the platform, and then we had the work of populating the library, of actually sourcing the materials, translating them, editing them, illustrating them, uploading them, before we could even think about promoting. So just to get to the point of having a critical mass of materials in the library took us to 2014, which is the official birth date of Darakht-e Danesh, when we actually launched. We had an event at the Embassy of Canada in Kabul to showcase the platform and start telling people about it. So it looks like many, many years, but we wanted there to be enough materials that when a visitor came to the library, that they wouldn't leave, that they would find what they're looking for, which meant that we needed hundreds of materials before we could launch. So it was a lot of work. So that brings us to 2014. And then we could start promoting. So now we felt proud of ourselves enough that we've got something in this library. Let's start telling people about it. And you'll see some images in a moment of how we did the promotions. And then in 2016, we came up with this idea to install the library in teacher college computer labs offline. And how we did that was, so the Ministry of Education had computer labs at, I think, most of the teacher colleges, or at least many of them, in the different provinces. They were all offline, they weren't connected to the internet. And so we set up a local area network. So the computers in the lab operated like they were on the internet in terms of being able to access our library. So eventually we were in 16 teachers' colleges. So all the teachers in training and the faculty members could use the library on site despite not having internet on site. Then in 2018, we were recognized for our efforts by the American Library Association and received the presidential citation. And in 2019, we added the first sister sites to the library. So our users over the years had been asking us for full courses. They would say, we like the videos, the books, all of this stuff, but we want to take a full course on the website. Do you have something like that? And we didn't, but we got to work making it. And that ended up needing a platform to itself. So we built a second platform, which was called Darakht-e Danesh courses, or DD courses for short. And that's where our courses live. But it was easier said than done. So it took us a long time to publish the first course. And then, of course, I don't need to tell you what happened between these two circles. But in 2022, it became clear that we were going to need a third platform because we needed to find a way to restore access to secondary education for girls who had had that right taken away from them. And so we launched DD Classroom, which is our online high school. And so that's the youngest branch of the tree. And together we now call these three things, DD Library, DD Courses, and DD Classroom, we call them DD Academy. So that's the umbrella for the three branches of the tree. And then here we are today celebrating a decade of having these tools out in the world for people to use. So I'll just show you a few pictures. So yes, so this is part of how we started getting people to use the library. Mr. Parwani would go and do demonstrations at teacher colleges, at schools, at NGO offices for communities, walk them through, how to open an account, how to log on to the library, how to search for what you're looking for, how you can use the resources, that you can not only use them as they are, but you can adapt them, you can translate them into another language, you can change them, you can mix and match. So sort of teaching about open educational resources. Next slide. So yeah, just some more classroom pictures and some girls at a high school in Kabul using the library for their homework. So this was very hands-on work. We used other methods like social media. We have instructional videos on the website, but the real work was being out in communities, telling people how the library worked and what it would do for them, and getting them to actually put it into practice. And that happened under Mr. Parwani's leadership. Next slide. And we would go to events in Afghanistan, different exhibits and fairs, and set up a table and have a little laptop open so people could try out the library for themselves and give out all our swag. Next slide. We tried all kinds of things, stick-on tattoos. We had billboards all over the country. They had to be really big to be seen above the blast walls in Kabul, but they could be smaller in other locations. We had them in urban areas and in rural areas. Next slide. So this is when we received the American Library Association, but I think we were all in Afghanistan at the time, so we had to get our friend, Dr. Rebecca Miller, to go accept the award on our behalf in, I think it was in New Orleans in 2019. So she did that for us. Next slide. So what do we have today? We have close to 8,000 learning materials in the library. You will find them in 9 different languages. So, of course, we have the 2 national languages of Afghanistan, plus English, plus 6 minority languages. And we feel that work is very important to help preserve the language diversity of Afghanistan and support language standardization and just sticking with our belief that people should be able to read in their own language. They should have access to storybooks for their kids in their own language. Sorry, just go back for one moment. We see this number, you see 51,000, so that's our visitors in the last 30 days. I took those numbers yesterday, so that was as of yesterday. We see this fluctuate quite a bit. It never goes lower than 30,000, but sometimes it goes above 100,000. We've seen it go to 130,000. So at any given moment, there are many people on the library. Over 90% of them are physically in Afghanistan. But they represent, as you know, Afghans are all over the world, so it's really fun to go in and look at the countries of the visitors in the last 30 days. But most of our users are actually in Afghanistan. And over time, that's added up to millions of people who have used the library. Next slide. So I just want to sort of explain a little bit about the methodology of why this solution? Why did we choose this as our answer, our contribution? And in part, it comes from, I guess, my own practice, and I don't know if it's the right or wrong way, it's just what I do, of kind of digging deeper and trying to always look for the root cause. And I'll kind of land somewhere and then later realize, oh, I didn't dig deep enough. I got to dig further. And I've done this for the last 20 years, and I'll probably do it all of my life, but to kind of explain where I've landed underground up until now. Initially, I showed up in Afghanistan in 2003 with this idea that the answer in the aftermath of the country's experience under Taliban rule until 2001 was human rights, and it was human rights advocacy and sort of the practice of human rights. But I revised that once I arrived because I talked to people and to women in particular, and they said, yeah, we know about human rights and we believe in human rights and we want to have rights, but what's standing between us and rights is illiteracy. And so I went back to Canada with my tail between my legs and I enrolled myself in university once again and sort of redid my higher education in literacy and language education. Because they had helped me understand this link between rights and education, that the pathway to human rights lies through education. But then, after a few years, I started to understand that it was more than just, opening classrooms, getting kids in school, teachers back in teacher college, people in university, that it was all about the quality of education that people had. And what we were seeing often happen was kids were in school and they weren't learning anything. They were spending years in school and not becoming literate. And that's not an education. So quality, it became apparent that quality was really important. And eventually from there, that part of achieving quality of learning and teaching comes through the acquisition of critical thinking. And supporting critical thinking and creativity had to be embedded across all of our learning programs. And that's where I've landed. So I'll keep you posted in a few years where I land, but that is hopefully a little bit of clarity on why this approach. Next slide. Okay, so if you'll indulge me, I just want to tell you a little bit about what we're doing right now and where the library sits in our programming. We've had a lot of changes in our programming over the past 3 years for obvious reasons. We've had to go through adaptation. We've had to, unfortunately, in some cases, stop some programming that became too risky. and we added additional new programming. So today, our Technology for Education program is our largest program because prior to 2021, it was complementary to traditional education. We could strengthen the education that people were getting in classrooms with technology. Today, it is the vehicle for education. So that required a pivot in our programs, and it required moving resources into the work we were doing already in virtual education. So I explained the three branches of the tree. Next slide. And you're going to hear more from my colleague about the library itself. So what I'll do is just tell you a little bit about our high school. So as I mentioned, we opened it in 2022 with a inaugural core class of just 2 grade 7 classes. So we had 50 students, and we thought we'd see how this goes. This was new for us. We had run a school in person, but not a full online high school before. And today, we're up to 524 students, and we're up to grade 10. Next year, we will add grade 11, and the year after, we will add grade 12, because we have to keep our students moving along. We use a hybrid curriculum, so our students study the Afghan curriculum for grade 7, 8, 9, and during that time, we're getting them ready to transition to the Ontario curriculum in grade 10. And the reason for that is that our students will graduate with an Ontario high school diploma because they can't receive a high school diploma as girls from the authorities in Afghanistan. So we needed another authority and another jurisdiction to make that possible. So we've partnered so that they get a Ministry of Education in Ontario certification when they graduate. And the students attend, it's synchronous, so they attend every day, 6 days a week, for several hours a day, and they're doing really well. Next slide. One of the other things we do is to support both our own students, but also the students of the many other programs out there who are doing virtual ed, is we help them with the hardware, because that can be a huge barrier. Women, from what we see, are not having a lot of challenges finding programs to enroll in, but they do have challenges in being able to pay for internet, to pay for a laptop or a tablet. They have challenges with electricity, so having something like a power bank can be really helpful. So remote communication assistance was launched in 2022, and individuals can apply and request a piece of hardware or 6 months of data to take a course online, and groups can apply as well. So schools or other organizations that are running programs with larger number of students can apply there. Next slide. We've continued our scholarships program. We saw a pause for a few months where it was uncertain, what was going to be accessible to people, and then we saw a huge spike in applications for our scholarships to cover higher education costs for women and girls. Next slide. So I'll just give you a little bit of some of the metrics of those 2 programs I just mentioned. So in our remote communications assistance, which launched in 2022, we've been able to support over 4,000 women with devices or data, or sometimes a combination. And just in this year to date, we've made 1,183 awards. And the most common request by far is for internet connectivity, followed by devices as the second. And in the Shafia Fund Scholarship Program, which is an older program, we have awarded 390 scholarships, and we have processed 370 applications this year. So of course, not everyone is approved, but that's the number of applications that have come through this year, and the most common request is for course fees or tuition. Next slide. One of the areas in which we support people with humanitarian assistance is our Learning Plus Basket program. So I've included this because it shows you how we had to adapt. We are not a humanitarian organization. We're not an emergency organization. We're doing more development work. But the reality in Afghanistan, people are struggling to feed their families. So we had to find a way to meet that need. So what we did was combined our work in education with humanitarian assistance. And so previously, before 2021, we were distributing what were called learning baskets directly to households. We started doing that during COVID when kids stopped attending schools. We brought the school material to them in these learning baskets. And then we added food assistance and depending on the season, winterization supplies, other things to support them with their day-to-day needs. And we just changed the name to Learning Plus Baskets because it's learning plus is the food. Next slide. Okay. Yep.
Sorry.
All right. We also do lots of public engagement and advocacy work here in Canada. And I'll just highlight one initiative on that front, which is our campaign to engage Canadian universities and colleges in helping restore access to higher education for women. So we ask institutions to take one or more of these 6 actions. As much as possible, we push them to open up whole degree programs to women, or at least diploma or certificate programs, offer scholarships, recognize women's prior learning so they don't have to start all over again when they start at a new institution. So we made a toolkit for them, and our team members engage with universities and colleges and help them action these items. And my colleague Kimmy is here. Advocacy is one of her areas of work, and she's a great resource if you have more questions about this area of our work. That's just one thing we do in the advocacy program. Next slide. There's a lot happening that doesn't get heard about because it can't easily be shared. But we recognize that there were all of these actors out there doing virtual education and kind of going on their own, whereas it made sense that we talk to each other, that we coordinate, that we work together. So we've been part of the Alliance for Education of Women in Afghanistan, which currently is 70 organizations that have come together to pool resources, to coordinate, to share information, to advocate together. And we've played a leadership role in that work. We're on the steering committee of the Alliance, along with Stanford University, the UNHCR, the American University of Afghanistan, and a couple, Arizona State University's Education for Humanity, and a few other programs. So that's a very active, growing network that helps us play a role in coordination. Next slide. So that's a sampling of what we're doing. We are doing other things that I won't have time to tell you about, but these are some of them. And you will find information about this work on our website. We are also working with Afghan communities in Turkey and Pakistan with our digital learning centers, including providing secondary education and other services there. We've continued to do teacher training. We have all of our online courses. And my other colleague, Nahid, who is with DD Courses, so that second branch of the tree, DD Courses. And she has a tech background and is the person behind the scenes who stands up those courses. And how many courses do we have now? Do you know off the top of your head?
The free ones?
Current published ones. Yeah, so there's 12 courses on DD Courses and another 6 or so in the pipeline coming. So more will be published by the end of the year. And you can take them too. They're free for everyone. Some of them are in partnership with universities. So you get a certificate issued by that university. And they're self-paced, so you take them at your convenience and in your language. Okay, next slide. All right, so just to shift gears slightly, I wanted to, just zoom out a little bit. This is what we're doing, and this is our world, and we derive a lot of hope from the work that we're doing and the fact that allows us to interact with people in the country and hear their stories and their triumphs and their challenges. But it's a dismal situation and it's not right. And one of the things I wanted to say while I'm here and speaking to you as mostly Afghans in this room is that I'm really ashamed at the world's silence in response to what's happened in Afghanistan. And I don't know, I've really tried to understand, but I don't know how anyone could hear the stories coming out of the country and not have their heart stirred and not want to just scream in rage. I don't know how anyone could hear about the story that was in The Guardian recently of the woman who was gang raped in prison, who protested, who was an activist, and was gang raped by the Taliban, and then had her video sent to her. I don't know how anyone can hear the stories of the organized and systemic sexual violence taking place in prisons, a story that's been courageously covered by Hashde Sob's investigative reporting. I don't know how people can hear about the girls being married off as children by starving families, the rising cases of femicide, the attacks, the murders and disappearances of journalists, of civil society activists, of people who worked with the previous government, who were part of the previous military. I don't know how people can hear of the hunger killing children from one side of Afghanistan to the other. And that's because of the mothers who can't work, because of the policies of the regime, and because that regime has tanked the country's economy. So there's blood on the hands of the Taliban, and by extension on the hands of every party that helped put them there. That said, I do remain hopeful, but the last 3 years have really caused me to believe that we don't actually have civilization in the world yet. Because when these crimes against humanity happen with our full awareness that they're happening and the world turns its back, then, my God, we're still in the dark ages. And that's how history will look at us. Values like human rights and the right to choose your own representatives, to political participation, to equality, these things have only been achieved when everybody has them. They're not just for some people and not for others. Rights are universal or they're nothing. So next slide. I wanted to show you a letter that I got 2 weeks ago from a 15-year-old girl who had recently left Afghanistan. She's living in Pakistan as a refugee with her family. Her name is Tahira. And you can read it for yourself. But the part I'd highlight is where she says, "We want the world to hear us, see us, and feel us. We are not dead in a corner. We are still alive with our hopes and dreams." And I think of this often, when I read a letter like this, it really counters the narrative that the Taliban are trying hard to put out in the world, that this is a conflict between them and their ideology and the West. Just last week, with the news of the new rules that are being imposed, including new rules on women not being allowed to speak and show their faces, they've responded to UN criticism in the past couple of days by saying, this is simply the West being arrogant. This is simply them not understanding our culture, not being respectful of our religion. And that's really in their interest to spin that narrative. Rather than the narrative of Afghans oppose what we're doing. Afghans criticize what we're doing. And when I read a letter like this, it makes it very clear that the greatest opposition, the greatest resistance of all to this terrible ideology is coming from Afghans themselves. And yet, around us, I hear and see people living in the West falling for this narrative because it's convenient for them to fall for that narrative. So we have a lot of work ahead of us because we have to tackle what's going on in Afghanistan. We have to be there for people living under the regime and what they're enduring. And we also have to face our own society and ask them hard questions, looking closely at our culture here in Canada, and ask those around us, why are you not outraged when you hear of this happening? Where are the protests in the streets? Who is feminism for? Is it only for Canadians or Westerners? Do human rights have borders? Did the ideals of the Enlightenment have an expiry date? So there's these two parallel battles happening, and they have to be fought together. That's the only way. There's just not enough of us screaming loudly enough to be heard. So we need a groundswell of rage. Next slide. That said, it will eventually happen. When the Taliban were not the governing authorities, but the insurgents, when they were an insurgent force, there was a saying often repeated that was attributed to them, where they supposedly said, you've got the clocks, we've got the time, meaning that they would just wait out NATO and the Americans. But there's something else that has the advantage of time, and that's good ideas, like free access to information, the pursuit of knowledge, and ensuring every person, no matter who they are or where they are, has the right to learn and can grow into the person they're meant to be and realize their full potential and therefore benefit the world with that. Ideas like this will prevail. Their time will come. It can be later or it can be sooner, but it will come. So we have time too, and now we'll wait them out. Thank you. I have to mention that in these 10 plus years of work, the library has become synonymous with somebody in this room. He's taken it as his own and made it into something that I never dreamed could be as successful as it is. And it just seemed impossible to find that combination of someone with who was a polyglot, who had all of these language skills, who had all of these editing skills, who had an eye for quality, who knew both the culture of our audience, but also the hybrid culture of our translators and the culture here, and who would work so hard and so diligently to build this library. And when you see those numbers, those nearly 8,000 resources that we have in the library and the millions of people who have benefited from them, that all the credit goes to Mr. Parwani.
Thank you so much, Dr. Oates, for providing us the context in which DDL is operating in Afghanistan. It is also safe to say that DDL activities have not gone unnoticed within the Afghan community. We're now going to invite Ustad Masood Badaksh, Head of Religious Affairs Committee of Masjid Omar bin Khattab, to further share on DDL's impact within Afghanistan.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Nahmadu wa nusalli ala Rasul al-Kareem. Yarfa'i Allah alladhina amanu minkum walladhina utul ilma darajat. خواهران و برادران بسیار گرامی، السلام علیکم و رحمت الله و برکاته. Good evening. ما با یک دو مصرع شعر بیت کوتاه آغاز میکنم، چون اسم درخت دانش جناب پروانیس به گرامی انتخاب کردن. اسمی با مسمای است که از یک شعر متول حکیم ناصر قبادیانی بلخی اینگی استخراج شده و استفاده شده که عقا و جا و نام بسیار نیکو بر یک کار فرهنگی و علمی. نیکوهش مکن چرخ نیلوفری را، برون کن ز سر، برون کن ز سر باد خیره سری را. درختت اگر بار دانش بگیرد، درختت اگر بار دانش بگیرد، دیگه شب برادر اگر یاد دارم داره بگویم و زیر آوری چرخ نیلوفری را. من خواستم یک سم گرفته شد. واقعا جناب پروانیس نام بسیار با مسلمان انتخاب کردید. درخت دانش یک ترکیب بسیار و زیبا و مقبول از درخت و دانش. من افتخار میکنم به این نامی که جناب پروانیس به گرامی انتخاب کردن و من مفتخر به این هستم که از زبان شیوا و ادبیات بسیار پربار فارسی استفاده کردن و امروز ما از او حظ میبریم از اسم درخت دانش. افتخار با آقای پروانیس. خواهران و برادران بسیار گرامی، باز من به خاطر ازی که سهم خود ادا کرده باشم یک شعری را بسیار کوتاه خدمتتان میخوانم که من گپای خود در شعر اکثرا بیان میکنم. در بیان مفصل وقتش نیست. تا توانی قلم میتراش که متاسفانه قلم ما تراشیده نتونستم و جناب آقای پروانی و همکارانشان دکتر اوتس با افتخار تمام این قلم را تراشیدن و قلم ها را تراشیدن تا توانی قلمی میتراش بر نتوانی کاغذی میخراش. ما از آن جمله کسایی هستیم که تا کاغذم خراشیده نمیتونیم. در برابر عظمتی که این درخت دانش داره متاسفانه ما کاری نکردیم. ما باید کاری میکردیم که حداقل اگر قلمی تراشیده نمیتونستیم برای کشور کاغذی رو میخراشیدیم که تعامل متاسفانه ما تنها ما و امثال ما متاسفانه انجام ندادیم برای کشور، برای سرزمینمون، برای دختران و زنان کشورمون، برای پسران کشورمون. بازم با قولی حضرت مولانای بلخ دوست دارد یاری ناشفتگی کوششی بیهوده به از خفتگی. ما شخصا فقط یک کوششی بیهوده انجام میتونم. دعوت میشم دوستا لطف میکنن آقای پروانی مرحمت کردن که برای دعوت کردن. فقط هم کوششی بیهوده خود انجام میتونم. امید است که حداقل ما بتوانم که با این کوششی بیهوده خدمتی کرده باشم در راستای علم، ادب، فرهنگ، تاریخ و جغرافی کشور. فقط به این اساس است که ما حاضر میشم و یک چند کلمه را که حداقل یادم ندارم او را من اینجا میگم و شما لطف میکنین، مرحمت میکنین، نادیده میگیرین، اغماض میکنین و مرا مورد ملامت قرار نمیدین دیگه و خاطر دلایل مشخصی که ما دارم. به این اساس ما بازم یک آیه مبارکه بسیار کوتاه. قرآن میگه اقرا، بخوان. اقرا، بخوان. انگلیسی میگه اقرا، رید. اما طالبان چی میگه؟ طالبان چیست؟ طالبان چی میگه؟ طالبان میگه لا تقرا. Do not read. نخوان. Which one is correct? Read or not read? یک سوال است. به نظر شما کدامش درست است؟ read. درست است؟ در طالبان چی میگه؟ Do not read. متاسفانه. ما در این مزرعه قرار داریم. Our prophet محمد صلی الله علیه و سلم says اطلب العلم ولو کان فی الصین. شما علم را جستجو کنین ولو در چین باشد. آیا در چین درس شریعت داده میشد؟ آیا در چین حدیث و فقه و تفسیر بود که پیغمبر خدا فرمود 1400 سال پیش تشویق کرد که شما بروین در چین علم یاد بگیرید. Our prophet Muhammad صلی الله علیه و سلم says seek knowledge. If it is in China, this is our prophet hadith. I don't know why Taliban, I don't know. Terrible ideology. I want to say something. Dr. Laren Oates, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Congratulations to you. For 2 decades, your impactful efforts in providing educational opportunities for the Afghan girls and women in Afghanistan. Thank you so much, Dr. Oates. Dr. Laren Oates, we always remember you. We always remember you. We never forget you. We never forget your sacrifice, your impactful efforts for girls and women in Afghanistan. Thank you so much. Once again, thank you so much, Dr. Oates. ما گپای خود زیاد دراز نمی کنم. فقط یک بار دیگر تشکر و سپاسگزاری از آقای پروانی. Thank you so much, Dr. Oates. دوستان عزیز، ما یک لوح تقدیر دارم به این مناسبت برای Dr. Oates. I have a certification of appreciation for Dr. Laren Oates. Please, Dr. Laren Oates.
Rani.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Registrazione ragazzi, altra cheese.
Thank you so much.
This is an extraordinary honor. I'm very humble. And I share this with all of our team at Women for Women. It's been a group effort. And I thank the Afghan community for all the support and trust and enthusiasm. Many of you are volunteers with us and supported us over the years, and that's been so encouraging. Yeah, I actually am speechless, which usually doesn't happen to me. I'm just kind of stunned, so I'm going to go sit over there and just kind of soak it in. Thank you.
You deserve it.